Hi, thanks for joining me. Welcome back to the channel. So today's video is a little bit different and basically I am making this video in response to a press release which came out last week. Here it is here. If we look at the title of the press release, The Return of an Icon, the new Revox B77 Mark III reel-to-reel tape recorder. And there is also a second subject. Revox announced at the same time its new own in-house Revox Analogue master tape collection. Okay, it says on here, a significant step for the Analogue community, a significant step for Revox. Well, I think a significant step is a slight understatement. So what I want to do really is just I will run through this press release. I'll talk about a little bit about Revox and Studer. They're two brands of the same company, two arms of the same operation, so to speak. A little bit about the history, and I've also printed off the spec sheet of this machine, and I'll run through its specifications and features, and not just list them, but try and explain why they are so important. And what an amazing, what does it say? A significant step for the Analogue community. Absolutely. Okay, so grab yourself a coffee, sit back, and I will carry on. So first of all, why tape? What's the fuss about tape, master tape, etc.? I'll tie this in with a little bit of history. So Willie Studer founded the Revox company in 1948. And as I've already said, Revox and Studer are two legs of the same company. Revox is the domestic consumer home market brand, and Studer is the professional recording brand. Okay? That's 76 years ago, okay? And that was around the time that tape was first entering the market, and basically before the 40s, tape didn't exist, and recordings had to be made mechanically by shouting, performing, singing into a large trumpet, and that would be driving a cutter on a disc, and it's how the very, very earliest 78s were made, okay? So recording on tape really started in the 40s, late 40s, and Willie Studer, he wasn't the first, but he was right there at the very, very start of it. And as I say, the first domestic machine, the first consumer Revox machine was launched in 1951, and the first Studer Pro studio recorder was released in 1952. And from then on, it just became the standard for all recording studios, for all recordings. Everything was made on tape right up until the early mid-90s, when digital recording started to come in and replace it. And this is a debatable subject, but I strongly maintain that digital recording isn't better. It's just a lot easier and a lot cheaper. And that's why we have digital recording today. Okay? That's my opinion. So that's tape. Now, open reel tape, records were made, mixed, and the master was created. And that master is literally, it is the original piece of art. Think of it like the Mona Lisa, the actual thing on canvas that Leonardo painted, rather than one of a million billion postcards, posters, images, JPEGs, whatever. It is the original. That's the master. Now that master played back on a studio master recorder, such as the Studer A80, which I very fortunately managed to find and buy one, which was released in 1970, incidentally, that model. That played back is literally, I would say, that is the definitive sound. You cannot get better than that, okay? I also want to just throw in that throughout the 60s, Studer became I would say the worldwide standard for recording studios. And there are some very, very, very worthy alternatives like Ampex, for instance. But even today, if you check Air Studios, John Webber's mastering suite in there, I've been in there. He uses a Studer A80 to replay master tapes. I haven't been to Bernie Grumman's, but I've seen a lot of photos. He uses a Studer A80, as does Kevin Gray. I don't know about other mastering engineers, but I think anyone who's mastering from analog, from tape, almost certainly will be using a Studer machine, almost certainly. Okay, that's how important Studer Revox, it's the same company. That's how important it is, and that's how important tape is, if you like. Okay, so the Revox B77, because that's what we have here. We have a new Revox B77 Mark III. So what are the B77 Mark I and Mark II? What are they? So, okay, the Revox B77 Mark I was introduced in June 1977. I assume that's why it was called the 77. And that remained in production until 1980, when the B77 Mark II was introduced. Now, the Mark II just added a couple of extra features, variable speed, etc., over the Mark I. And the Mark II remained in production until 1998. So it had a product life of 18 years, which is quite phenomenal. Unheard of in this day and age, but you just think about how products these days are just made to last a year or two and then you throw them out. They're not serviceable, they're not repairable. It's an aspect of modern life that drives me insane, actually. I think paying good money for good quality manufacturing, for good quality engineering, etc., that will last you a lifetime, that's the sensible, that's the wise thing, that's the green thing to do. You think about if you bought a B77 and you're still using it 50 years on nearly, that is what I think proper company service is all about. So Revox is a brand that looks after its customers and makes proper products built to last, products built to do the job. And that's why this new Revox B77 Mark III is such an exciting prospect, because there are a couple of other tape machines on the market that have been launched over the last few years. There's a couple of machines from a very small niche company in Germany called Bullfinger, and there's a machine made in France by a company called Analogue Design, I think. And then there's a couple of machines made by a sort of designer artist, if you like, Costas Metaxas. Now, all of these machines are, the Metaxas, the cheapest machine, I think, is getting on for 50,000 for a playback only machine, 60 for 1,000 if you want playback and recording. The Bullfingers, I think the cheapest machine is playback only again, and that's about 15,000. And the AAD machine, again, I think it's about $26,000 for a playback only version. I'm not entirely certain if they've even released their recording version. These are all sort of very small companies, very, very, very niche. Maybe one or two employees, there may just be like, a one-man band. So it's a very, very, very different prospect to a company like Revox, where, they have a worldwide network of support, 76 years of heritage, and still to this day will restore and service machines they built 50 odd years ago. So that's something that you're getting. That's something that the introduction of a new Revox reel-to-reel machine really is a significant event, okay? Because it's built to last, and your buying confidence. I mentioned the B77 Mark 1 and B77 Mark 2. Even to this day, I mean, they're apparently their warehouse is full of parts, and they even sell factory refurbished machines. So right today, you can go on the Revox website and buy a factory refurbished B77 Mark 1 for €8,600, and a Mark 2 for €8,980, with a guarantee, factory refurbed. Again, it's a mark of the type of company that you're dealing with, in so much as that they still support products of that age, but it's also a mark of how well these products are made, that they can still be serviced and run in 50 years time. Okay, so that's kind of why Revox, why the Mark III, why this stands out head and shoulders above everything else on the market. And like I said, there is only 3 other brands. There's a couple of other brands that make things, basically they're remanufacturing, some massively so, they're only using maybe the skeleton of an old machine. But again, these are sort of very small one-man band type operations, and the question of, what happens in 10 years' time, what happens in 20 years' time, it's certainly a consideration that I think you would have if you were spending tens and tens of thousands of pounds on a machine. Okay, so let's get back to the Mark III again specifically, and its features and specifications. So what I want to point out, this is not a Mark II facelift. Last year, or was it earlier this year actually, there was a Revox Yellow Edition, which was a B77 Mark II, and that was a very, very special limited edition, manufactured at Revox, and that was a Mark II with some significant modifications to it. Probably the most obvious from the outside was that it had a digital tape counter. What I mean by digital is an electronic sort of digital display tape counter, rather than a mechanical version that the Mark 1 and the Mark II had. But there are a few other modifications to it, but it was actually a Mark II machine. This is a Mark III, this new machine. It is not a Mark II facelift. And it has very, very, very many new features, some of which are absolute kind of game changers for me, okay? So the first of these is it has switchable CCIR and NAB equalization. Now, all of the previous versions you can either order them in a CCIR or an NAB, and what the heck does that mean, you may ask? Well, they are recording operation type of formats, like on vinyl, where you've got RIAA equalization. These are things which were standardized, in the case of RIAA back in the 1950s, although there was sort of remnants of other EQs, NAB, FFRR, etc., that sort of hung over a bit into the 60s and arguably later on thereafter. But it's 2 different sort of operating EQs, and basically you've got to have that right for the tape you're playing. If you don't, you'll get sort of too much treble or too much bass, or not enough treble or not enough bass, depending on which way you go with it. So it's important to have the right EQ. Now, back in the sort of the 50s, 60s, and really into the 70s, I think, in the studio world, NAB, I think North American Broadcast is what that stands for, was pretty much the universal sort of EQ standard, and most master tapes back in the day would have been made in that format, and therefore you would need that. That's the correct way of playing them back. Incidentally, all the smaller sort of 7-inch reels, commercially available consumer reels at 3 3/4 or 7.5 IPS, they were all recorded in the NAB EQ too. So I've got a Technics RS 1500, which will play the small reels and the large sort of studio reels. The small reels tended to be 4-track, and that's another thing I'll get onto briefly. That's NAB only, so I can't play any of the modern master copy tapes that are available from most manufacturers, because they're all recorded in CCIR. There are a couple that will record of these tape manufacturers that do record in NAB. That is worth mentioning. But switchable CCIR NAB is very, very, very worth having. The other thing that's again brand new to this machine, which was only available on the sort of the high quality sort of Studer professional machines by going through quite a round the houses sort of approach, whereas on here it's just the press of a button, is a switchable tape operating level. Now what that means is it's kind of the level that the tape recorder imprints the signal onto the tape, and this is all about basically this is all kind of about the tape formulations and how they've changed over time. Now, my Technics I just mentioned, that would operate at a tape operating level of 185 nanowebers per meter. Nanowebers per meter is the the unit that they measure it, and it's you've got your strip of tape, which is typically a backing polyester or something like that, with sort of iron oxide dust bonded to the front, and it's you record the signal by sort of with effectively an electromagnet. That's what the record head is, sort of modulating that and printing a pattern, if you like, a magnetic pattern onto that tape. Now that's where the nanowebers per meter comes from. Now 185 is like the old standard from probably the 60s, and any consumer machine like an Akai 4000 DS or whatever would have been operating on that level, and that was really set by the tapes of the time. And the pro studio use back in the 60s, most of the pro sort of master tapes of the 60s era would be at 250 nanowebers, which is 3 decibels, 3 dB louder than 185 nanowebers a meter. So 250 nanowebers is kind of the old studio standard, and that was set because the studio quality tapes at the time, if you went any louder than that, you'd get into tape saturation. So basically tape formulations have improved over the decades, and yes, there was a period in the 70s really where I'd say the main culprit was Ampex, when they made a development which retrospectively turned out that it was it wasn't good. It had sticky shed syndrome problems. Basically, it kind of went all gooey. You can restore those tapes with very specialist baking methods, they call it, but essentially the progression of tape development was in a forward direction, if you like. And one of the things that tape manufacturers always aimed to improve was the maximum saturation level, if you like, the kind of like the holding capacity of the tape. And modern high output tapes, if you check through the specifications, I think recording the Masters SM900, its maximum, the saturation point measured in nanowebers is over 2000. It's 2100 and something. So basically, you can see that gives a vast amount of headroom, vast amount of headroom. So what's happened is over the years, studios have recorded at higher levels, and really I'd say from the 1970s onwards, the most common studio level would be 320 nanowebers, which in itself is 5 dB above that original baseline of 185. Some studios, sort of more recently, have moved up to 510 nanowebers, which is 9 decibels louder than the original 185. so 4 decibels louder than the 320 we've just mentioned. And now the reason that I think this is a really, really, really useful kind of feature is that whilst most of the purveyors of master tape copies, companies like Analogue Productions, the Tape Project, Hemiolia, Chasing the Dragon, STS, Analogy Records, I will be forgetting some and I apologise, but most of these companies, they use 320 nanowebbers. Uniquely, I think, in the tape master copy market, HCH House use 510 nanowebbers, so that's the plus 9 dB. Now, I've had the conversation with Volker Langer of HCH House on quite a few occasions, so it's a bit of a pain in the butt that their tapes are so much louder than everyone else's, and really what that requires is you need to sort of recalibrate your tape machine for them to sort of get the best out of them and ensure against overloading your preamp or whatever. And Volker's response would be like, well, it's better, it's best. I don't want to do something that's not the best. And that's a fair argument. You can't really argue with it. But it is a bit of a pain in the arse. They do, I have to say, offer 320 nanowebber versions as well, and they are cheaper. But, whenever I'm contemplating getting a tape from HCH House, currently they've got a Suzanne Vega album I'm very, very interested in. Even though it costs more, even though it's a pain in the arse, I will get the 510 nanowebber version just because I agree with Volker. It is the best. It is the best way. So to have a machine with just a switch, press a button, it's, perfect, absolutely perfect. It's a great, great, great addition to the feature set. So what else? New audio circuits. The entire audio in and output boards are completely redesigned from the ground up. There's been quite a lot of advancements in sort of audio electronic technology over the last 50 years. They have totally eliminated electrolytic capacitors from the circuits, which are, if you buy an old Studer or Revox, anyone will know, the first thing you need to do is change all the electrolytics because they have a lifespan of maybe 10, 20 years. So again, by eliminating these, you're not only improving the sound quality, but they're even extending the life over the phenomenal life of them existing machines or their previous machines. Other changes, they still use the Revox heads, their own Revox heads, but these again have been updated to provide longer life, so it's new heads. The motors, I think they're using the same or developments of the motors they used in the old machines because again they're proven to run for 50 years or so. Other changes. They have a totally new design, very high quality audiophile or studio quality headphone amplifier built in, which will drive both high and low impedance headphones, making it perfect for every application really. As with the yellow machine I mentioned earlier, the B77 Mark III does have an electronic digital tape counter, which will count up in minutes and seconds and that. And then these last two aspects, again, it illustrates the versatility of this machine and how it is, it's studio quality for the home or the studio for that matter. So it has balanced XLR studio outputs with RCA adapters, so you can plug in a phono plug, so to speak, like you'd use on your hi-fi, or you can use the sort of more studio standard XLR leads, and it has those for both inputs and outputs. But not only that, what there also is there's a switch which allows you to set for, I think the two settings are referred to as -10 or +4 dB. And basically -10 is the domestic level and +4 is the professional studio level. And these are two quite different sort of voltage levels of the inputs and outputs. And this is separate to the tape operating level, the nanowebers per meter thing. This is how the machine itself interfaces with the rest of your system. If you're using it in a hi-fi system, you'd select the -10 dB. If you're connecting it up to a mixing desk or microphone amplifiers or whatever in the studio, you would select the +4 dB level. And that's pretty much the run of the features. I ought to just mention it is a 2-speed machine and runs at 7.5 and 15 inches per second, and it's 2-track only. 2-track is the professional studio format. Previous, you can still, I think, probably get the Mark 1 or the Mark 2 specified as 4-track machines. A 4-track machine is like a cassette. It's only using half the tape width, because you've got 2 tracks going forwards and then 2 tracks going backwards, and that's the old type of idea where you play a tape side A and then turn it over and play side B. Okay, so this isn't a 4-track, this is a 2-track, which is its raison d'etre is to allow you to play professional studio quality, mastered quality tapes at home and experience music like you've never heard it before. So that brings me on to the second sort of major sort of announcement on this press release, the Revox Analogue Master Tapes collection. So on Revox's website, you can go there right now and you can buy for $479 each a 1-to-1 copy of a master tape. And there's a selection of titles: classical, pop, jazz, but you'll see things like the Yellow Stella album that was released recently, which I did do a video on up here, you may want to check. But you'll also see tapes from Hungarian band Jabe, which I've got one of their tapes and they're absolutely marvellous. And there's a Suzanne Vega album, which is different to the Suzanne Vega album on the HCH House website, which I mentioned previously. So there's 2 more Suzanne Vega master tapes I want. There's a Lisa Stansfield tape. So the range is really quite vast. But basically this venture is done in collaboration with HCH House. So I spoke to Volker Langer of HCH House last week, and he was actually at Revox at the time, and he showed me what he's doing there. And basically he's setting up a master tape distribution studio at Revox, and this comprises a whole bank of Studer A80 master recorders, which I mentioned earlier, and some custom HCH House electronics to ensure the impedance is correct between the machines, so that basically they'll load up the original master tape on one playback machine, and then on the other machines all set to record, they will literally just record an exact duplicate of that tape, and that's what you buy, literally a 1-to-1 copy of a master. And as I said earlier, this is a sound that, unless you've heard it, you really won't believe how good it can be. Okay, and this is why this is so exciting. Currently there are 125 titles on the HCH House catalogue, and each of those they do in, I think it's 3 different versions. I've got at least a dozen of their tapes, and they are phenomenal. But I also know that HCH House are in discussions with some very notable acts about releasing their catalogue as master copies. And as I mentioned earlier, we've already had one of the Yellow albums, Stella, released this year. We've got the next release of that is imminent. I believe it's 1 second, and basically the first 5 Yellow albums, they're all due. They're all in the release schedule as 1-to-1 master copies, and I can't say what other titles that they're going to be launching, but there's some really good stuff. Reel To Reel Rambler, incidentally, is a website that I formed purely to talk about tape and promote tape, not because I've got any vested interest in it. I don't work for any of these companies, not paid by any of them, but I'm a lifelong audiophile who's worked in the hi-fi industry, and discovering that you can actually buy the copy of a master tape and play it back is, I just felt that this needed to be pointed out to would-be audiophiles. There's people out there with £100,000, £200,000 hi-fi systems that have no idea about this stuff. So that's why I started the Reel To Reel Rambler website, which I'll put a link down below. But just very briefly, there's a whole bunch. There's about 50 different labels, companies producing master copies. And then there's a whole bunch of other labels that make their own audiophile recordings. Check out the Reel To Reel Rambler website, which I mentioned. Again, I'll put a link below, because there's a page where it just lists all of these suppliers with their contacts and links and everything else. Okay, you have to pay for these things, obviously. That's why commercial formats were developed, so that we can afford them. But if you want the best, it is actually available out there for an awful lot of LPs. Okay, so I think that's about it, really. I think that covers everything. I am in conversation with Revox and HCH House on this, with my Reel To Reel Rambler hat on. And I have been promised a review sample of the machine when it's available, and also a factory visit to visit Revox and see these things being made. So that will be super cool. And if that comes off, of course, I will be, I'll make a video. But for more info on tape, do check out the ReelToReelRambler.com. Thanks very, very, very much, and I'll catch you all again soon.